Hello, fellow ant keepers, and I think I speak for many other ant keepers when I say I haven't really hibernated my ants properly before. In fact, 18% of my followers who keep ants over on Instagram haven't either. This is partly because I didn't know how. I mean, there's obviously the fridge method where ant keepers put their ant setups in their fridge, and the plus of that method is that it's completely temperature controlled. There's no chance that it will be too warm for hibernation, and there will be no chance that it will be too cold and it will freeze and the ants will die because of hibernation, because you can set the exact temperature that you want on most fridges. The disadvantage is that for ant keepers who live with other human beings, as most ant keepers do, those other human beings won't be that happy with hundreds if not thousands of ants in their fridge, even if they're not free to roam around. Remember, the majority of the population still thinks that ants are weird pests. My parents only just put up with me having ants, let alone storing them where they store food for 3 months of the year. So, what other options are there? Well, there's the option of just doing nothing, which has been my personal favourite over the past few years, and storing them outside. Not doing anything can have detrimental effects on the queen's health and the growth of the colony. During hibernation, queens enter a stage of diapause, which means something in Latin. What are you looking at me for? Do I look like Caesar to you? This state of diapause means the pause of pregnancy, stopping the development of eggs inside the queen and the progression from eggs to larvae to pupae once the eggs have been laid just before hibernation. Essentially, the progression of the entire colony is just put on hold for a few months. This pause gives the queen's reproductive system a break, resulting in longer colony lifetime and faster colony growth once out of hibernation. Not hibernating your ants prevents this vital rest period from happening. So obviously, if you don't have a fridge to keep your ants in, you should just take your ant setup and chuck it outside. Right? Wrong! In many temperate regions, regions where hibernating ants live, the temperature can plummet to sub-zero many times overnight, and sometimes for days on end, especially the further north you go. If your ant setup is out there while it's freezing, it will result in the water inside the hemolymph, the insect blood inside the ants, literally freezing. Water expands as it freezes, not only killing the cells inside the ants, but expanding their body so their exoskeleton is irreparably damaged. What I've just said was completely untrue. Well, not completely. I was just testing you. It turns out that ant hemolymph has glycerol in it, which prevents the formation of ice crystals. Ants can actually survive after 80% of their body freezing. With that being said, it is still good to try and keep your hibernation temperatures above zero. If held at sub-zero temperatures for too long, the ants will come out about as dead as Margaret Thatcher. But Margaret Thatcher's death was a good thing. Yeah, good point, but ants dying is definitely bad. So how come ants who literally live outside can't survive outside? Well, that's because if you chuck your ant setup in the garden, it's on the surface where the temperature goes the lowest. It's always the coldest at the surface. Ants that live outside burrow deep into the ground, 1.5 meters according to Ants Netherlands 18, though some say they can go as deep as 3 meters. They do this because the ground happens to be a pretty good insulator, meaning however cold it gets on the surface, that cold will have to work its way down to penetrate into the ground. Most hibernating ants also bunch up into a really small clump to protect their heat. Say it's -2 degrees at the surface, but for the past month, it's been a pretty stable 5 degrees on the surface. That means that the ground below will be about 5 degrees because it's been held at that temperature because of the surface, and it will take a while for the -2 to come down into the ground. That doesn't sound like it makes sense. So, if you are hibernating your ants outside, you need to insulate them in some way. So, how can you make a hibernation setup that actually insulates your ants in the same way or a similar way that the ground does? The most effective way of insulating something is to trap layers of air around it that can't escape. So my first tip is to go out and find some sort of container that has a friction fitting lid that doesn't let much air in or out. This will trap most of the room temperature air that you originally have your ants in and try and keep it at that temperature for as long as it can. You don't want the container to be fully airtight because otherwise the ants will go ahead and do a little thing called suffocating, which isn't very good for their health. My next advice is to take shreddings or your incorrectly filed tax returns and nestle your ants in there. Obviously this won't work if your outwall doesn't have a lid. Speaking of lids, if you do have a lid for the outworld, then you want to put that on, even if it has air holes, because this will mean that the air from outside will have to penetrate into the box, through the shreddings, and then into the final outworld. By the way, if you're hibernating a test tube colony, it can be quite a good idea to wrap it in aluminium foil, or any setup small enough to wrap around. For example, my two Lasius flavus colonies, Yin and Yang, will be getting the aluminium foil treatment. Many lids have holes to let air in, but it will still be beneficial because it will slow the rate at which cold air can come in. I made a hibernation box for my Lasius niger and two Lasius flavus colonies over winter. Okay, finished.